"Sir, you're under arrest for trespassing on your own property." That's what the cop almost said before I showed him my deed. See, this Karen had been terrorizing our entire lake community for months, calling the police on anyone who dared to exist, without her permission. She threatened to sue me for $50,000, filed false police reports, and even tried bribing county officials to get me thrown off my own land. Here's the kicker. She had no idea I owned the $800,000 mansion she was renting. Picture dawn breaking over Lake Serenity, the smell of pine needles mixing with morning mist, when suddenly, blue police lights start strobing across my grandfather's old cabin. Gravel crunches under tires as two squad cars pull up. And there she is, Brenda Carmichael, standing on her mansion's deck in a bright pink bathrobe, pointing at me like I'm some criminal mastermind. What would you do if someone called? The cops on you for fishing on your own property? Let me know below. Where are you watching from? I bet half of you have your own HOA horror stories. My name's Marcus, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd found paradise. After 20 years in military logistics and a divorce that felt like getting run over by a tank driven by my ex-wife's lawyer, I inherited my grandfather's cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota. Population 3,200, where the biggest drama used to be Mrs. Henderson's cat stealing fish from the neighbor's docks. The cabin's nothing fancy, a 1960s A-frame sitting on 2 acres of pure heaven. Every morning I'd wake to loons calling across mirror-still water. Step onto dockboards worn smooth as glass by 40 years of Minnesota weather and breathe in air so clean it made my lungs forget about 20 years of Army diesel fumes. The place smelled like my childhood old cedar mixed with pine needles and that sweet metallic scent of lake water at dawn. For 2 perfect years, Lake Serenity earned its name. 47 properties scattered around 8 miles of shoreline, mix of blue-collar locals and summer folks, all following one sacred rule. Wave when you see each other, help when someone's in trouble, and mind your own damn business the rest of the time. Then Hurricane Brenda hit. She bought the biggest eyesore on the lake, an $800,000 McMansion that looked like someone had dropped a suburban Dallas house into the Minnesota woods by accident. Within her first week, she'd introduced herself to half the lake by pontoon boat, always wearing those blindingly white capris and cardigans bright enough to signal aircraft. Sweet as artificial sweetener on the surface, but her eyes cold as January lake ice. The morning everything changed. I was sitting on my dock with coffee that tasted like liquid peace when I heard the low rumble of an overpowered pontoon boat cutting through the morning calm like a chainsaw through silk. "Yoo-hoo! Hello there, neighbor." Brenda's voice carried across the water with all the warmth of a tax audit. She pulled up to my dock wearing a smile that would have made a used car salesman proud. "I'm Brenda Carmichael from the Executive Estate, across the way." Executive Estate? Jesus. "I'm here on official HOA business," she announced, producing a manila folder with the theatrical flair of a game show host revealing prizes. "The Lake Serenity Homeowners Association has voted on updated aesthetic standards, and I'm afraid your rustic setup isn't meeting our community guidelines." I set my coffee mug down so hard it rang against the wooden rail like a bell. "What homeowners association?" Her plastic smile cracked just enough to show teeth. "The one that protects our property values from declining influences. That aluminum boat has got to go. And frankly, the fishing gear scattered around makes the whole area look like a bait shop exploded." My declining influence was a 1995 Lund that had caught more fish than her fancy floating living room ever would. The scattered fishing gear was my grandfather's hand-carved rod holders and a tackle box older than she was. "Lady, this property has been in my family since before you were born. There's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there sure as hell won't be." The mask slipped completely. Her voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. "We'll see about that, won't we, soldier boy?" She gunned that pontoon engine like she was fleeing a crime scene, sending a wake that slammed into my dock hard enough to spill my coffee. The smell of burning gas and expensive perfume lingered in the morning air like a threat, mixing with the clean pine scent until it made my stomach turn. As I watched her mansion's windows glinting in the sunrise like a predator's eyes, that old military instinct kicked in, the one that kept me alive in 3 deployments. This wasn't just some neighbor dispute. This was war, and I had the sinking feeling I'd just been drafted. 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my front door like a parking ticket from hell. Inside was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd seen since my ex-wife's divorce settlement demands. Lake Serenity Homeowners Association violation notice blazed across expensive letterhead in blood-red letters. Apparently, I owed them $500 for failure to maintain dock aesthetic standards and had 30 days to comply or face additional fines and potential property liens. The document looked impressive official seals, case numbers, even legal-sounding language that would make most people panic and write a check. Too bad it was worth less than the paper it was printed on, but most folks wouldn't know that. Time for some reconnaissance. The Cedar Falls courthouse basement smelled like old leather and broken dreams, where dust motes danced in fluorescent light like tiny ghosts of bureaucratic nightmares past. I'd learned during my Army days that the best intelligence always comes from the people who've been filing papers longer than you've been breathing. So I made friends with Dolores, the 70-something county clerk. "Another HOA victim, hun," she whispered, pulling out my property file with hands that shook slightly from arthritis. "That Carmichael woman's been in here 6 times this month asking about enforcement procedures and lien authority. Between you and me, honey, she doesn't know her ass from her elbow about property law. My deed was crystal clear. No covenants, no restrictions, no HOA authority whatsoever. But here's where my old logistics training kicked in. Always check what the enemy is really doing while they're distracting you with paperwork theater." Brenda's Lake Serenity Homeowners Association existed all right incorporated 18 months ago with exactly 12 members out of 47 lake properties. In legal terms, they had about as much authority over my property as my neighbor's cat. But while cross-referencing ownership records, something made my detector start screaming. Several lakefront properties had recently transferred to Carmichael Holdings, LLC. A quick online search revealed the truth. Our self-appointed HOA queen was running an unlicensed vacation rental empire, turning quiet family cabins into party houses for Twin Cities tourists. The woman lecturing me about community standards was the one actually destroying them. I remembered something my grandfather used to say: "You can judge people by how they treat service workers and government employees." Apparently, Brenda's strategy was to either intimidate them or buy them off. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Brenda's voice oozed through the speaker like honey mixed with industrial solvent. "Marcus, sweetie, I saw your adorable little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily difficult for yourself. Just asking questions, Brenda. Neighborly curiosity." "Oh, honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me?" Her voice dropped to that special tone women use when they're about to destroy your credit rating. "I have connections you couldn't imagine, and I will absolutely report you to the appropriate authorities for harassment and cyberbullying." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer thought she had with local law enforcement. As evening settled over the lake, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle percussion of waves against weathered wood, breathing in air that still smelled like freedom and fish fry. The sunset painted everything gold, including the Truth Squad members' houses, scattered around the shoreline like fortress lights. Brenda had made one critical mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who actually knew how to gather intelligence before going to war. If Brenda thought Facebook drama would scare me off, she clearly hadn't done her homework on military veterans. We don't retreat. We adapt, improvise, and occasionally overthink everything until 3 a.m. while planning 17 different battle strategies. Tuesday morning brought a surprise visitor. Tom Hendress from County Code Enforcement, looking about as enthusiastic as a man facing a root canal, his pickup truck crunched across my gravel driveway at exactly 9:00 a.m. Because apparently Brenda believed in punctuality when filing bogus complaints. Mr. Marcus, sorry to bother you, but I've got to follow up on some reports about dock violations in an abandoned vehicle. Tom looked embarrassed, which told me everything I needed to know about the quality of Brenda's accusations. I poured him coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the battery acid they serve at government offices, and we walked down to examine my supposedly criminal dock setup. Tom measured everything twice, checked his clipboard, then shook his head like a man who'd wasted his morning on nonsense. "Between you and me," he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "This is the 23rd complaint I've gotten from. The same address in 6 months. Lady's got the county office on speed dial. That's when Tom let slip something interesting. Brenda had actually tried to slip him a $100 bill during their last encounter, claiming it was a consulting fee for finding creative interpretations of building codes. The woman wasn't just playing neighborhood dictator, she was testing the waters for small-time corruption. My grandfather always said, "You can judge people by how they treat service workers and government employees." Apparently, Brenda's strategy was to either intimidate them or buy them off. That evening, my phone rang, with a number I didn't recognize. Brenda's voice oozed through the speaker like honey mixed with industrial solvent. "Marcus, sweetie, I saw your adorable little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily difficult for yourself. Just asking questions, Brenda. Neighborly curiosity. Oh, honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me." Her voice dropped to that special tone women use when they're about to destroy your credit rating. "I have connections you couldn't imagine, and I will absolutely report you to the appropriate authorities for harassment and cyberbullying." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer thought she had with local law enforcement. As evening settled over the lake, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle percussion of waves against weathered wood, breathing in air that still smelled like freedom and fish fry. The sunset painted everything gold, including the Truth Squad members' houses scattered around the shoreline like fortress lights. Brenda had made one critical mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who actually knew how to gather intelligence before going to war. If Brenda thought code enforcement was her nuclear option, she clearly hadn't graduated to actual weapons of mass bureaucratic destruction yet. That honor was reserved for what happened at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning that started peaceful and went sideways faster than a greased pig at a county fair. I was enjoying my morning coffee ritual, that sacred first sip that makes you believe the world might not be completely insane, when the unmistakable crunch of police car tires on gravel shattered the lake's morning calm. Blue light strobed across my cabin walls like some twisted aurora borealis, and I could practically feel Brenda's satisfaction radiating from her mansion, deck across the water. 2 officers climbed out of their cruiser, looking about as thrilled as mall security guards called to break up a senior citizen flash mob. The younger cop had that fresh-faced earnestness of someone who still believed. Every 911 call was a genuine emergency. His partner, a grizzled veteran with sergeant stripes and the weary expression of a man who'd seen every flavor of human stupidity, clearly knew this was going to be another waste of taxpayer money. "Mr. Marcus, we've received reports that you're trespassing on private property and made threatening statements toward a female resident. I invited them in for coffee because, honestly, if you're going to be falsely accused at dawn, you might as well be civilized about it." The senior officer, Sergeant Peterson, according to his name tag, accepted gratefully. Probably because he knew government coffee tastes like liquid regret mixed with budget cuts. "Sir, we have to respond to all calls," Peterson said, settling into my grandfather's old kitchen chair that creaked like a ship in a storm. "But between you and me, this complaint doesn't pass the smell test. That's when I produced my secret weapon. Documentation, security camera footage, property deeds, the complete timeline of Brenda's harassment campaign, and even Tom, the code enforcement officer's written statement about attempted bribery. I'd learned in the Army that paperwork wins wars, and this particular battle was about to get very one-sided. Peterson reviewed the footage of my supposed threatening behavior, which showed me helping elderly Florence load her fishing gear into her car while Brenda lurked behind her mansions. Windows like some suburban spy novel villain? The trespassing occurred on a public access road that had been public since before Brenda was born, despite the shiny new private property signs she'd posted overnight, like some kind of legal fairy. "Ma'am," Peterson muttered, shaking his head at the footage. "Either you're the world's most polite terrorist or somebody's been yanking our chain." While the officers were reviewing my evidence, my phone rang. Dave Morrison, a private investigator who moonlighted at the local tackle shop and looked like he could arm wrestle a bear, had finished the background check I'd commissioned. What he'd discovered would have made a soap opera writer weep with envy. Brenda Carmichael owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her previous community in Minneapolis. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife and serve it at the county fair. She'd been sued by that HOA and lost, which explained her intimate knowledge of legal intimidation tactics. More concerning, she owed money to everyone, from contractors to credit card companies, with a pattern of using legal threats to delay payments until creditors gave up or settled for pennies. But here's where it got really interesting. Dave had discovered that Brenda's rental operation violated 3 different zoning ordinances, none of which required business licenses she'd never bothered to obtain. The county had no record of her vacation rental business, which meant she'd been operating illegally while lecturing everyone else about community standards. The Truth Squad had grown to 15 Lake residents, each with their own Brenda horror story. Tom at the marina revealed she owed $3,200 in dock fees and had threatened to sue him for discrimination when he demanded payment. The hardware store owner shared security footage of Brenda ordering supplies, then disputing the charges with her credit card company, claiming defective materials she'd never returned. The pattern was clear as lake water on a calm morning. Brenda used legal intimidation to avoid paying legitimate debts, hoping people would rather write off the loss than fight her in court. Peterson finished reviewing my documentation and shook his head like a man who'd just realized he'd been hunting unicorns. "Mr. Marcus, I strongly suggest you consider filing charges for filing false police reports. This lady's been using us as her personal enforcement arm, and that stops today." As the officers drove away, their tires crunching across gravel that now sounded like victory, I noticed Brenda's silhouette disappearing from her mansion window. The morning mist was rising off the lake, carrying with it the clean scent of pine and possibility. My attorney had scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning, claiming he had news that would change everything. Something in his voice suggested Brenda's house of cards was about to collapse in ways she never saw coming. The loons called across the water, their haunting song mixing with the distant sound of normal people starting their day without threatening lawsuits or bribing public officials. Arthur Peaton had been my grandfather's lawyer since Carter was president. And at 78, he still dressed like he was arguing cases before the Supreme Court. His office smelled like old leather and expensive, cigars with law books stacked so high they threatened to topple over and bury unwary clients in centuries of legal precedent. "Marcus, you might want to sit down for this," Arthur said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that had probably witnessed the signing of the Constitution. "I've been reviewing your grandfather's estate more carefully, and there's something we missed." He spread documents across his mahogany desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Property deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, all bearing signatures and dates I'd never seen before. "When your grandfather died, you inherited more than just the cabin," Arthur continued, his voice carrying that careful tone lawyers use when they're about to drop bombshells. "In 1987, he created the Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now own 60% controlling interest in a trust that holds 4 lakefront properties." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. 4 properties, including the $800,000 mansion, currently occupied by one Brenda Carmichael. The words hit me like a slap with a wet fish. I'd been fighting my own tenant without knowing it. For 3 years, Brenda had been paying rent to a property management company that deposited her payments into an account I never knew existed. The woman who'd been terrorizing me about property standards was literally putting money in my pocket every month. Arthur pulled out a lease agreement thick enough to stop bullets. Your grandfather was thorough. This lease includes clauses about peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties, prohibition of unlicensed business activities, and maintaining community harmony. Ms. Carmichael has violated approximately 14 different terms. The irony was so perfect, it felt like divine intervention. Brenda had been harassing her own landlord while falling behind on rent payments, operating illegal businesses in violation of her lease, and systematically disturbing other tenants in the same property trust. How behind is she on rent? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. 2 months with late fees accumulating. The property management company was actually preparing eviction proceedings, but they needed trust approval. That's you, by the way. I stared at the documents, my mind racing through 3 years of deposited payments I'd attributed to some mysterious inheritance account. Brenda's desperate behavior suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just facing harassment complaints and zoning violations. She was about to lose her home base for the entire rental operation. Arthur, she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she? His weathered face cracked into a smile that belonged in a courtroom victory photo. Not unless she's considerably smarter than her recent behavior suggests. The strategic implications hit me like a tactical revelation. I could evict Brenda immediately for lease violations, but that felt like winning through technicality rather than justice. My grandfather had always taught me that real power meant knowing when not to use it. What would you recommend? Arthur leaned back in his chair, which creaked like old ship timbers in a storm. Give her one final opportunity to make this right. Document everything. Offer mediation. Show you tried to resolve things reasonably. Courts appreciate landlords who exhaust diplomatic options before pulling the nuclear trigger. But if she escalated further, Arthur tapped the eviction notice. He'd already prepared. 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. Clean, legal, and absolutely devastating to her financial house of cards. I walked out of Arthur's office feeling like I discovered I'd been playing chess while everyone else thought we were playing checkers. The afternoon sun painted Main Street golden, and for the first time in months, I felt like the universe might actually have a sense of humor. Brenda Carmichael, HOA dictator and vacation rental queen, had been paying her worst enemy to let her destroy his peace and quiet. Sometimes the best revenge is discovering you held all the cards from the very beginning. You know that feeling when you're assembling IKEA furniture and suddenly realize you've been holding the instruction manual upside down for 3 hours. That's exactly how I felt walking out of Arthur's office, except instead of a wobbly bookshelf, I'd accidentally become the landlord of my own worst enemy. Time to build a case that would make Perry Mason weep with professional jealousy. Arthur became my strategic advisor, channeling decades of courtroom wisdom into what he called the nuclear option playbook. His office transformed into mission. Control with manila folders spreading across every surface like legal kudzu. The man had been filing documents since Nixon was in diapers, and he approached this case with the methodical precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Think of landlord-tenant law like coaching a football team, Arthur explained, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against yellow legal pads. You set clear rules, players follow them, or they're benched permanently. No personal feelings, just consequences, for documented violations. Dave Morrison, my private investigator, who could probably track a ghost through a snowstorm, delivered his final report with the satisfied expression of a man who'd struck gold in someone else's backyard. Brenda owed $73,000 across multiple creditors, had tax liens pending on her previous Minneapolis property, and a credit score that made subprime mortgages look attractive. Here's something your audience should know, Dave said, sliding papers across Arthur's desk. You can search public records online for anyone's property liens, judgments, and tax issues in most counties. Knowledge is power in disputes, and most of this information costs nothing but time to find. Janet, a retired librarian turned intelligence analyst, had organized the community documentation project with efficiency that would make the Pentagon weep with envy. Her 3-ring binder contained time-stamped photos, witness statements, and a cross-reference index of Brenda's harassment incidents that read like a criminal psychology textbook. The marina owner provided receipts for unpaid bills and photocopies of bounced checks, Janet reported, adjusting reading glasses that had seen more neighborhood drama than a soap opera writer's fever dreams. Local contractors shared identical stories about payment disputes followed by legal threats. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez, who'd been tracking complaint patterns with the dedication of a bloodhound following bacon grease, provided guidance that straddled the line between official procedure and friendly advice. "Document everything," he emphasized, leaning against Arthur's filing cabinet. "Courts want to see that reasonable people tried reasonable solutions before things escalated." The technical preparation felt like planning a military operation if military operations involved elderly librarians and small-town lawyers plotting the downfall of vacation rental empires. I installed additional security cameras with audio recording capability because apparently my property had become more surveilled than a federal courthouse. Security cameras with audio can legally record on your own property in most states, Arthur noted. Checking local statutes in a book thick enough to stop small arms fire, always verify local laws first, but documented evidence beats, he said, she said, every time. We developed what Arthur called the escalation protocol, a step-by-step plan that would give Brenda every opportunity to save face while documenting her refusal to act reasonably. First, I'd approach her as a concerned neighbor offering mediation through county community services. If she refused or escalated, we'd reveal the landlord relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. Janet researched Robert's rules of order like she was preparing for a Senate hearing, while Arthur prepared legal notice templates for every possible scenario. The man had contingency plans for his contingency plans, including backup strategies that involved everything from zoning enforcement to potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. Always give someone a face-saving way out of conflict, Arthur advised, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. Courts appreciate parties who attempted reasonable resolution, and juries hate bullies who refuse reasonable offers. The Truth Squad had evolved into a neighborhood watch program that would make the NSA proud. 15 Lake residents coordinated through our group chat, sharing real-time updates about Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. Tom at the marina agreed to document any future incidents, while local businesses committed to supporting our paper trail with their own harassment documentation. We even prepared media contacts in case the situation reached public interest levels. The local newspaper editor had already expressed curiosity about the lake dispute, especially after hearing whispers about bribery attempts and zoning violations. The community protection aspect felt like something out of a feel-good movie, except with more legal documentation and fewer musical numbers. Several elderly neighbors installed security cameras after Brenda's intimidation visits, while Truth Squad members started accompanying vulnerable residents during errands to prevent isolated confrontations. As I sat in Arthur's office that evening, surrounded by evidence folders and strategic planning documents, the smell of old law books mixing with Janet's homemade cookies and the faint aroma of Dave's cigar smoke, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful, a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, I'd give Brenda one final chance to choose dignity over destruction. After that, the nuclear option was locked and loaded. If Brenda thought my growing community support was just neighborly chit-chat, she clearly hadn't been paying attention to the tactical situation developing around her. What happened next proved that desperate people make spectacularly stupid decisions, especially when they're cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. The sabotage started subtly, which should have been my first warning that Brenda had graduated from amateur hour harassment to genuine criminal behavior. She'd been monitoring our Truth Squad activities through Facebook stalking that would make a teenage ex-girlfriend proud, creating fake profiles to gather intelligence and spread counter-narratives about my supposed instability. Tuesday night, my security cameras caught something that made my military paranoia look like casual concern. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's vehicle crept past my dock like a suburban ninja mission gone wrong. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, but the truck's license plate was clearly visible under my new LED floodlights. Wednesday morning brought a surprise that would have ruined my day if I hadn't learned to expect the worst from people wearing too much perfume and carrying legal threats. My fishing boat was sitting half submerged at the dock, looking like a maritime crime scene. The drain plug had been removed with surgical precision. Not loose, not damaged, just gone. $2,800 in water damage to the motor and electronics, plus tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Brenda had been alive. The smell of lake water mixed with oil and gasoline created an aromatic cocktail that screamed insurance claim and criminal charges. But here's where Brenda's desperation revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how evidence works in the 21st century. My security cameras had captured everything in glorious high-definition detail, complete with audio of her handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs while he worked. I filed the police report with the methodical precision of someone who'd been documenting harassment for months. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez arrived within an hour, took one look at the video evidence, and shook his head like a man watching taxpayer money circle the drain. "This crossed a line," Rodriguez said, examining the deliberately removed drain plug. "Property damage is a felony if it exceeds $1,000, and your electronics alone put this in serious criminal territory." While I was dealing with insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Brenda was apparently having her own version of a nervous breakdown across the lake. Truth Squad members reported increasingly erratic behavior that made her previous harassment look like polite conversation. She'd started approaching elderly neighbors with the subtlety of a door-to-door cult recruiter, demanding they choose sides in what she called the lake war. Florence, bless her 90-year-old heart, told Brenda exactly where she could stick her loyalty demands, using language that would make a sailor blush and a Sunday school teacher take notes. Tom at the marina finally banned Brenda from the fuel dock after she screamed at a teenage employee about conspiracy pricing and discrimination against successful businesswomen. The kid was making $8 an hour and probably couldn't spell conspiracy, much less orchestrate one against vacation rental queens. The grocery store incident became local legend within 24 hours. Brenda had a complete meltdown at the checkout line, accusing the cashier of overcharging her and demanding to speak to corporate headquarters about systematic harassment of professional women. The manager, a patient woman who dealt with everything from coupon fraud to holiday shopping madness, asked Brenda to leave after she started filming other customers while shouting about witnesses to discrimination. But the real intelligence goldmine came from Janet's library research skills, which had uncovered Brenda's residential history going back 8 years. The pattern was identical at every address: neighbor disputes escalating to harassment complaints, accusations of unstable and dangerous behavior directed at anyone who stood up to her, and eventual departure under circumstances that suggested legal pressure. Previous landlords described identical escalation patterns ending in eviction proceedings. One Minneapolis property manager had documented a restraining order after Brenda threatened to destroy a neighbor who complained about her unlicensed dog breeding operation. Another apartment complex had security footage of her keying cars belonging to residents who'd reported noise violations. Meanwhile, my silent preparation intensified like a military operation approaching D-Day. Arthur filed a restraining order documenting the property damage and harassment pattern. We coordinated with the insurance investigator about potential fraud charges since Brenda's handyman had conveniently developed amnesia about his late-night marina visits. The pressure was building from multiple directions. Online reviews for Brenda's vacation rentals started mentioning unstable management and neighborhood disputes, causing her booking rates to plummet faster than her credit score. The property management company received formal complaints about tenant behavior that violated community standards. County zoning enforcement had begun their formal investigation into unlicensed business operations, while the local newspaper editors started asking uncomfortable questions about corruption allegations and harassment patterns. As I sat on my repaired dock that evening, listening to the gentle splash of waves against new bumpers and breathing air that smelled like victory mixed with pine needles, I realized Brenda had made one final tactical error. She'd turned criminal behavior into documented evidence that would destroy her in any court of law. When desperate people run out of legal options, they usually do one of two things: accept defeat gracefully or double down on stupid until they achieve legendary status. Brenda, being Brenda, chose door number 2 with the enthusiasm of a kamikaze pilot heading for an aircraft carrier. What happened next would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetically criminal. County Commissioner Bill Hayes had been serving Cedar Falls for 12 years without a single ethics complaint, which made Brenda's approach about as welcome as a tornado at a church picnic. According to Bill's later testimony, she strutted into his office Tuesday morning carrying a designer purse and the kind of confidence that comes from huffing your own supply of entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposition that could benefit both of us," Brenda had announced, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was buying state secrets instead of trying to bribe a small-town politician who probably made less than her monthly shoe budget. $5,000 cash for consulting services regarding the environmental hazard that was my property. She actually used air quotes while suggesting my grandfather's cabin should be condemned as a threat to lake water quality. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to recognize corruption when it walked into his office wearing white capris and desperation perfume. He'd immediately reported the attempted bribery to the district attorney's office, triggering an investigation that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket dispute. But Brenda wasn't finished shopping her criminal services around town like some kind of corruption door-to-door salesperson. She made similar approaches to the zoning inspector and even attempted to bribe a sheriff's deputy with what she called a community safety donation for overlooking her minor business license oversights. The zoning inspector, a by-the-book guy, named Carl, who treated building codes like holy scripture, actually wore a wire during their second meeting. The recording quality was so clear you could hear Brenda's jewelry jingling as she counted out bills while explaining how Marcus, the dangerous veteran, needed to be relocated for community safety. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez documented her bribery attempt in an official report that read like a criminal justice textbook example of how not to influence public officials. The woman had managed to turn a neighborhood dispute into a federal case, faster than you could say conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with news about the DA's investigation, his voice carried that special tone lawyers use when they're trying not to sound too satisfied about their client's vindication. "Marcus, she's facing potential prison time. Bribery of public officials is a felony that carries serious consequences. I felt conflicted in ways my military training hadn't prepared me for. I'd wanted justice, not to watch someone's life implode in real time. But Brenda had crossed lines that transformed neighbor disputes into criminal territory, and there was no putting that toothpaste back in the tube." The local newspaper editor, who'd been tracking the story with the persistence of a bloodhound following bacon grease, contacted me for an interview. "This has grown beyond neighborhood problems," she explained. "Public corruption allegations are legitimate news, and the community deserves to know what's happening." The media attention triggered Brenda's final public meltdown, which occurred at the boat launch in front of 27 witnesses who probably thought they were just coming to launch their fishing boats, not watch a daytime television drama unfold in real time. "This is all conspiracy," Brenda screamed, pointing at me with enough venom to kill small wildlife. "He's been stalking and terrorizing me for months. I demand he pay my legal fees and moving expenses." The accusation was so ridiculous that several witnesses actually laughed out loud. Florence, who'd been loading fishing gear with the patience of someone who'd outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally spoke up with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to say exactly what she thought. "Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years, and you're the problem here. That boy hasn't done anything but fish and mind his own business while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist." The crowd nodded agreement like a Greek chorus of common sense. Several people pulling out phones to record what was clearly going to be social media gold. Brenda realized she'd lost all community support and stormed off, threatening to hire real lawyers with money she clearly didn't have. That evening, Arthur advised me to reveal the landlord relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. "Time to end this before she hurts herself or someone else more seriously," he said, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. "Her criminal behavior has forced your hand." Word spread through town faster than gossip at a church potluck. The county attorney would attend to observe potential witness testimony, while the regional newspaper sent a reporter after hearing about corruption investigations in small-town America. As I sat on my dock that night, listening to loons calling across water that reflected stars and possibility, I realized Brenda had accidentally given me something I'd never expected: the moral high ground in a community that refused to be intimidated. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its day in court, or at least in the high school gymnasium. If you've never seen 300 small-town residents pack into a high school gymnasium for what was supposed to be a routine town council meeting, you're missing out on democracy's greatest spectator sport. The energy felt like a championship basketball game crossed with a public execution, except the popcorn was homemade and the drama was absolutely real. Local businesses had closed early so owners could attend what everyone was calling the Great Lake Showdown. The regional TV news crew set up cameras like they were covering a presidential debate, while county officials filled the back row with the grim satisfaction of people about to watch justice served with a side of public accountability. Brenda arrived fashionably late with her expensive Twin Cities lawyer, a slick-looking guy in a $1,000 suit who probably charged more per hour than most folks made in a week. She'd dressed for battle in a white power suit that screamed, "I'm important," while her nervous energy suggested she knew the walls were closing in faster than her credit payments. I approached the podium feeling calmer than I had in months, carrying a manila folder that contained enough documentation to sink a battleship. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of someone's stomach growling. Apparently, democracy makes people hungry. "Thank you all for coming tonight." I began looking out at faces I'd learned to call neighbors over the past few months. 3 months ago, I thought I was dealing with a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I'd like to share what I've actually discovered. Arthur had prepared a presentation that would make corporate executives weep with envy. Property ownership documents, projected onto the gymnasium's pull-down screen in letters large enough to read from the parking lot. The audience gasped in unison when the truth became clear, a sound like 300 people simultaneously realizing they'd been watching a magic trick performed in reverse. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Brenda Carmichael's landlord for the past 3 years without knowing it." The gymnasium erupted like a stadium after a game-winning touchdown. Applause, laughter, and more than a few "I knew it" shouts echoed off the basketball hoops, while Brenda's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a microwave. Arthur's timeline of lease violations played out like a greatest hits collection of tenant nightmares. Security camera footage of the boat sabotage drew actual boos from the audience, while audio recordings of bribery attempts made the county attorney sit up straighter and start taking notes that looked suspiciously like arrest warrants. Brenda's lawyer attempted damage control with the desperation of someone trying to plug a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership structure and acted in good faith to protect community standards. The audience's laughter was so loud it probably registered on seismic equipment in neighboring counties. Florence, sitting in the front row with the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to speak truth to power, shouted, "Good faith, my ass!" loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears and the newspaper reporter scribble frantically. Financial records showing unpaid bills and fraudulent business operations scrolled across the screen like a criminal psychology textbook written in spreadsheet format. Local business owners openly discussed Brenda's creative payment avoidance strategies, while Tom from the marina held up photocopies of bounced checks like evidence in a fraud trial. That's when I delivered the line I'd been practicing in my bathroom mirror for 3 days. Miss Carmichael, I offered you respect as a neighbor and reasonable discussion as a community member. You chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal behavior instead. I held up the official eviction notice, crisp and legal and absolutely devastating. As your landlord, I'm giving you 30 days' notice to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled privately and respectfully. The standing ovation lasted so long, I thought the fire marshal might issue noise violations. Florence led the applause like a conductor directing the world's most enthusiastic orchestra, while several Truth Squad members wiped away tears that might have been joy or relief, or both. Brenda stood up with the dramatic flair of someone who'd clearly been practicing courtroom scenes in her own bathroom mirror. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she shouted, pointing at me with enough venom to poison a small lake. "He's bought off law enforcement and the media. This is harassment and discrimination." Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez moved closer as Brenda's voice escalated beyond indoor conversation levels. Her lawyer physically restrained her from approaching the podium, probably saving her from additional criminal charges involving public disturbance and potential assault. The TV reporter interviewed me afterward with questions that felt like softballs pitched by a sympathetic grandmother. "What message do you have for other people dealing with HOA abuse? Document everything, know your rights, and remember that bullies only win when good people stay silent." The next day's newspaper headline read, "Lake Dispute Exposes Bribery Scheme." And suddenly, our little neighborhood drama became a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the importance of reading your property deeds carefully. As the crowd dispersed that night, chattering like excited teenagers after a concert, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful. A community that refused to be intimidated by anyone, no matter how loudly they screamed about their importance. Brenda vanished from Lake Serenity faster than a bad check bounces, packing her designer luggage and wounded pride into a U-Haul headed for Florida within 14 days. She left behind a forwarding address that probably wouldn't last 6 months in property. Damage that looked like a fraternity house after spring break. The criminal case wrapped up with small-town efficiency. Brenda accepted a plea deal for probation and 200 hours of community service, ironic punishment for someone who'd spent months terrorizing her actual community. Her expensive lawyer probably charged more for the plea negotiation than most folks make in a year, but at least justice got served with a side of financial consequences. I never planned on becoming Cedar Falls' accidental community organizer, but apparently defending your fishing rights makes you qualified for leadership positions you never wanted. The Lake Serenity Advisory Committee evolved from our Truth Squad, naturally establishing reasonable community standards without the fascist tendencies that plague traditional HOAs. We partnered with county environmental agencies on lake conservation, created a neighborhood watch program that focused on actual crime instead of unauthorized bird feeders, and established mediation services for disputes that didn't require lawyers or criminal investigations. The real magic happened when I discovered how to invest 3 years of surprise rental income. The Lake Serenity Community Scholarship Fund started with a revolutionary concept. Reward local kids who understood community service instead of community harassment. Every spring, we award scholarships to students pursuing environmental science, law, or public service careers. Our annual fundraiser has become Cedar Falls' premier social event, featuring fish fry that tastes like heaven, live bluegrass music, and storytelling contests where neighbors share Remember Brenda tales with the affection usually reserved for survived natural disasters. Florence won last year's competition with her Oscar-worthy reenactment of telling Brenda exactly where to stick her loyalty demands, complete with gestures that made volunteer firefighters blush and inspired the Methodist minister's sermon about righteous anger serving divine justice. Personal healing arrived like Minnesota Spring, slowly, then suddenly, bringing life back to places I'd forgotten could bloom. The peace I'd originally sought came with unexpected bonuses. Genuine friendships, forged in the fires of community resistance and neighbors who'd proven they'd stand together when bullies tried to divide them. Janet and I started dating around Christmas, bonding over shared appreciation for proper documentation and her remarkable talent for organizing neighborhood revolutions. Turns out librarians make excellent companions when they're not busy toppling vacation rental empires through superior research skills. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, building picnic tables for public lake access areas and teaching local kids how to create useful things instead of frivolous lawsuits. There's profound satisfaction in making something beautiful. From raw materials, especially after months dealing with people who created chaos from pure entitlement. Our lake conservation project became a statewide model for community environmental stewardship. Weekend cleanup days remove invasive species while elementary students monitor water quality and learn that protecting nature requires cooperation, not litigation. State agencies now showcase Lake Serenity as proof that communities accomplish remarkable things when they work together. 3 battle-tested lessons every homeowner needs. First, research deed restrictions before buying property. Most HOA requirements are unenforceable fantasies created by people with law degrees from Google University. Second, public record searches reveal anyone's liens, judgments, and business licenses through county websites for free knowledge trumps intimidation every time. Third, security cameras and documentation defeat harassment better than any lawyer. So, invest in quality equipment and understand local recording laws. Media coverage transformed our neighborhood drama into inspiration for communities nationwide fighting HOA tyranny. I've appeared on property rights podcasts, spoken at municipal meetings about harassment prevention, and somehow became the unlikely champion for citizens refusing to surrender to bureaucratic bullying. Last week, Janet mentioned her sister's battle with predatory towing companies targeting vulnerable drivers in Duluth. Same intimidation playbook, she said, showing documentation that triggered my well-developed bullying detection radar. Interesting, I replied, savoring morning coffee that tasted like victory and possibility. Dave Morrison's investigative services are still available. This morning, watching sunrise paint Lake Serenity golden while loons call across peaceful water, I hear grandfather's wisdom echoing across time. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everybody. The smell of pine needles mixes with fresh coffee and the promise of another day in a community that learned to fight back against those who mistake authority for permission to abuse others. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments below. Together we can help others fight these battles and win. And if you enjoyed watching justice triumph over entitlement with a healthy serving of poetic karma, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell for HOA stories, where ordinary people refuse to let neighborhood tyrants destroy their peace. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.